Hello lovely people, welcome to part one of my June reading wrap up.
Dooby 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 doo. Dooby 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 Sophie vlogs.
I have to begin my June reading wrap up by talking about a book that I read in May that I forgot to talk about in my May reading wrap up. Apologies. That is The End Crowns All by Bea Fitzgerald. This is a book that my friend at work lent me, and it is a Trojan War retelling, and it's a romance between Cassandra and Helen. And it also has asexuality representation in Cassandra. This was my first Bea Fitzgerald. I had a fun time. The cover I'm inserting here is hopefully the cover of the version I read because it's absolutely stunning. I enjoyed this. I particularly enjoyed talking to my friend about it because she has not read a lot of Greek mythology retellings and is not familiar with it very much either. So we had some really fun chats about it while we were reading it because something I liked about it is that Bea Fitzgerald does put in nods to original mythos in regards to there isn't one original strand discuss. I have a real soft spot for Helen. When I did my classical studies degree, I did a module on Helen, and it was looking at the many different ways that there are of approaching her character, and how actually when you look at original Greek sources there is often a bit more nuance there than sometimes there's given with later translators' takes on Helen and that kind of thing, and what Helen has come to symbolize. So one thing I really enjoyed about this was because it is written in a contemporary sort of writing style, it does delve into that idea of the idea of Helen and the mask of Helen, and then what the reality of Helen is like. This is, I think it's marketed as enemies to lovers. It's not really enemies so much as Cassandra as gift of prophecy, as seer who people don't believe, obviously can foresee what is to come with Helen's arrival, and is obviously not super happy that she's there. Something that I liked, that I don't think is a spoiler to talk about because this is literally sold to you as it will be a romance between these two women, is I liked the navigation of them becoming... They gain an understanding because Helen as this relationship with Aphrodite, of a goddess who is invested in you doing what she wants you to do for the narrative she wants to weave, but doesn't care about you at all as a human being. And Cassandra as, Cassandra's gift of prophecy comes from Apollo, and it is a punishment to then not be believed in what she is saying. This look at what it is like to be a human who the gods are invested in, but specifically a woman who the gods are invested in, and how different that is than when you are a male hero who the gods are invested in. And I really enjoyed that side of it. It definitely goes a bit cuckoo bananas at times. When you're reading something that is retelling a story that you know so well that has been told for thousands of years, literally, you are like, oh, I know where this is going to go because I know what happens to these people. And this is definitely a book that throws that out the window at some point and is like, no, we're doing what we're telling a story here. We're not caring about what originally happened. We're going down our own route. So that was fun. It did get a little bit bonkers wish fulfillment at the end in a way that I found quite unbelievable. I also found it did a little bit of, I think I talked about this in my May reading wrap up, it had a little bit of the characters being very emotionally literate, which I sometimes just struggle with when you're in the Trojan War, and it's for example, I loved the conversations on asexuality in that I felt like they were a great discussion of that, what it is like to exist as that, making links with certain characters and that kind of thing. I really enjoyed that. That's one that I thought was well done. There were a few other discussion points which just felt so clearly to me like a discussion point that it then jerks me out of the narrative a bit. I get that sometimes with if I'm posited in Bronze Age Greece, it's sometimes a bit strange to have people be so emotionally literate. So this is a lovely way of saying that this was like a fun read. I most enjoyed talking about it with my friend. I've actually lent her Pandora's Jar by Natalie Haynes because the next Bea Fitzgerald book is about Pandora. So I thought she might like to read that before she reads the Bea Fitzgerald, but then she also has been reading like the chapter on Helen, and we've been having some discussions like that. So that's been really fab. So that is me. That's the final book that I did read in May. Moving on to June books. Let's start off with changing tack wildly to some Moomins. If you've been following me on Instagram, you will know that I am having what I've dubbed soft Moominsummer. I've just fallen head over heels for the Mooms. I read 3 Moomin books in June. The first one I read was Finn Family Moomintroll. This is my favourite so far. In this, they discover this top hat that it has some powers that they don't know about. And shenanigans ensue. What I loved about this is that there's such a delightful moment where like Moomintroll has been transformed because he has hidden in the hat during hide and seek, and he's come out and he doesn't realise he's been transformed into something else, and no one recognises him, and at first he thinks that they're playing a practical joke on him, and then he realises that they don't know who he is, and he's so distressed, and then he has this interaction with Moomin Mama where he's like, surely you recognise your Moomintroll, and she just looks at him and she's like, that is my Moomintroll, and I honestly wanted to cry. What I loved about this, you know, it's like magical when you're like, I know about Moomins, but I had never really watched the show, never really read the comics. So this kind of was my first ever, like, let's actually engage with the Moomins, not just as like an aesthetic, but as like what they are. And there's this lovely like approach whereby they just welcome everyone into their home. Like at one point, these 2 little creatures with a suitcase turn up, and they're just like, oh, these are new friends, we just have to learn how to speak their language and what they like to have for breakfast, and then they can just live with us like all of our other friends do. And I adore that about the Moomins. So this was a 5-star book for me. I was hooked. I also read The Exploits of Moominpappa, which I didn't like as much just because this is told from Moominpappa's perspective, so his tone is a bit different, and Moominpappa has like I don't know, like it's excerpts of him writing this story. And the fun thing about the story is that you get a lot of the backstory of like characters' parents, so you understand like Snufkin's father and all this kind of thing. So that was really fun, and I did still love this. It's just Moominpappa's tone. He's like I can't think of a nice way of saying it. All the words come out bad, but it's just like like a wisdom man. He's like a wise old man, like reflecting on his youth, which was lovely, but didn't quite capture me as much as Finn Family Moomintroll. And then, because I mentioned I was having a little Moomin moment, someone who I work with lent me one of the books I don't have. This is Moominsummer Madness, which I meant to read on Midsummer, and I actually just read it all the day before. I really thought I was going to read it in 2 days. But then I just read it all the day before. So this is great. This is about, like, it's midsummer. The Moomins have to leave their home because this little volcano erupts, and then there's a big flood, and then they end up in this place. And it's kind of like they end up in like a theatre, and they like learn what theatre is, and they put on a performance and all this kind of thing. I have to say, with all of them, I love so much of what this world is. I find it so magical, so whimsical. Tove Jansson's illustrations throughout have such character to them. I feel like they've become very softened in like some of the way that they're done in merch and stuff, but her actual like sketchy little black and white illustrations, I find them so endearing. So yes, this is kicking off my little soft Moomin summer. I have 2 more Moomin books that I'm planning to read in July. I'm definitely asking for Moomin books for my birthday in July. I've taken out a biography of Tove Jansson out of the library, so she's having a great time. Let's move on to another book that was also brilliant. This is And the Band Played On, Politics, People and the AIDS Epidemic by Randy Shilts. This is a very chunky non-fiction book that is, I guess, investigative reporting about the AIDS epidemic. Specifically, we are rooted in America. It does look at stuff like the researchers in Paris and all that kind of thing, but a lot of it is concerned with contrasting the approach between like San Francisco and New York in how they handled this epidemic. It weaves together a lot of different focuses, whether that is from the scientists who are working very hard to identify what this disease is to develop a cure, from politicians who are really trying to lobby to get any funding from gay activist groups who are very conflicted. There was a lot of conflict within the gay community about how to changing behavior, what change of behavior is necessary, what is infringing on their rights and freedom of sexual expression, and all this kind of thing. Like, it's doing so much. It's giving you so many different perspectives, but in a way that I actually found immensely readable. This is honestly like 600 to 700 page book, and yes, it did take me a little while to read, but at the same time, I also felt like I kind of blasted through it. I just found it so compulsively readable. I can definitely see how, depending on your nonfiction taste, this might be like too in depth. Something about those, that way of changing perspective a lot, and you end up with this cast who feel so familiar to you, and you feel so rooted in them, and you dabble across all of them, that I don't know, I found it so immersive. This is not by any means the first book about the AIDS epidemic that I've read, the first non-fiction at all. I thought it was very well done in that way that it was constructed. I think really played in its favour, and it goes through chronologically. It's like broken down by time, so you really get that sense of, I can see people finding it slow and repetitive in that you just keep coming up against the same walls, because like those were what the walls were: lack of funding, lack of any support politically, this refusal to really acknowledge what was happening for so long because people didn't want to be associated with gay people at that time. Like the fights they had to go through, the absolutely unnecessary loss of life. Like, this book absolutely like destroyed me at times, I have to say. This was going to be a 5-star read. The one thing that meant that I didn't rate it 5-star is that it does focus quite heavily on this guy, Gaetan Duga, is that his name? I'm read this right at the start of June, and it's now mid-July, so I can't 100% remember, but very much focuses on him as patient zero, and of him knowingly going out and infecting people and all this kind of thing. We do know now that he was not patient zero, and I think what held me back from being like, this is a 5-star read, was, with our knowledge now, the way that it handles the person of him is questionable. In the publisher, Randy Shilts is no longer with us, but his publisher has spoken about how they consciously made a decision to frame this man that way, and to present that as like part of the narrative drive of this book. Like, you do read this and you do think to yourself, like, good God, how is this man behaving like this? Like, how can they, like, someone needs to stop him and all of this. And just knowing, there's articles, I can link them down below, that discuss like what we know now about this epidemic and all of this kind of thing. Like, that perspective is not necessarily a true perspective. So yeah, that's the only thing that held me back, but I do think it is like a phenomenal piece of like investigative journalism, and like you will really like oh, I'm being incoherent because it really got me. Book I have not got as much to say on is The Book of Not by Tsitsi Dangarembga, which is the sequel to Nervous Conditions. And as you all know, because I keep talking about it on this channel, loved Nervous Conditions. Read it for my Read the World project for Zimbabwe. Absolutely 5-star read for me. Got swept away in this like view of this young girl growing up, and all of the things she was facing, and trying to get an education and being driven and all of that sort of thing. This second book was written quite a bit later, I think, and it's looking at the time when, like, one of her like crowning achievements in that first book is that she gets into this boarding school. And this is like looking at her experience in the boarding school. She is in the dormitory with the other black students. They're a minority there. It's largely white students, and they're sort of all cramped into this one dormitory. And there's a lot of focus on like the inner politics of the school. This social system, this like standing system, this obviously it's very racial in like who's allowed to do what, and what is permissible and not. In the greater world, there is this conflict because it is the Zimbabwean independence, all of that sort of thing. So it's she sees things at the start of the book that are to do with this wider conflict, and they haunt her throughout the rest of the time that she's at school, and this crushing weight that she feels to be successful, to succeed, because that is like what her entire purpose is, and all of that sort of thing. So it's not that I don't find it in any way compelling. I think what I missed was like, I guess what I keep talking about that I loved from that first book was like this relationship with her cousin, this vulnerability, this, I don't know, I found it a lot harder to connect. I found it a lot harder because it's so fraught in this school system. Like, I didn't feel that there were those other people that she had that like connection with, that I could really like sink my teeth into and root for. I don't know. I don't think it's bad. I didn't love it as much as the first book. I do have the third and final book, This Mournable Body, to read, and I am hoping to read it over summer. So then at least I can sort of bring this trilogy to a conclusion, and just see how I feel about that. That one, I know she is an adult, so she's much older. I'm interested to see what that perspective is going to be. Also picked up, because of Dear at Novel Idea, De Profundis, The Ballad of Reading Gaol, and Other Writings by Oscar Wilde. De Profundis is the one that I wanted to read because of how Dear talked about it, and De Profundis was absolutely the writing in here that I loved the most. It's a letter that Oscar Wilde wrote to Bosie after he'd been on trial, after he'd been in jail, and it is so absolutely laying everything out there, laying everything bare, like, but also like a reckoning and a call to, I guess, change, to evolution. Like, it begins with this absolutely brutal, like, no, pulling the wool from your eyes, like his vision of Bosie and Bosie's failings and the way that they failed each other in the relationship, and it is absolutely listing out like this like attack on Bosie as a person, on his moral failings, on his personal failings, on the way that he failed Oscar, the way that he fails his family, like all of these sorts of things. And then it turns, and Oscar turns it on himself, and it becomes the same thing but towards himself, and his acknowledgement of, yes, you were like this, but I was like this. And he turns it on himself, and then he has this clarity of seeing himself, seeing the way that he messed up and his flaws and everything like this, and this vision of what he could be going forward that is much more honest. Still, this, like, he has like a real strong like individualism, like, as a concept that drives a lot of his beliefs that he had before prison and still kind of had while writing this, but a different view on it. He draws a lot of comparisons with Christ, with there's a lot of, because he was Catholic, so there's a lot of his like faith comes through, but just like this, I found it so raw, so visceral, so vulnerable. It was like a side of him that I had never read before. I've only read and seen like his plays where he's being like the rake, the wit, all of this, you know, like The Picture of Dorian Gray and that kind of thing. But this, like, laying it all out there, I found it so compelling and moving. As such, I don't think I found the other writings in this collection as interesting, because you start with this absolute knockout, and it's like a reckoning with himself. Like, The Ballad of Reading Gaol is fine. It's a long poem that's very like Victorian, I feel, in its sensibility and this like vision it portrays. Like it's like a sensational sort of like romantic, I guess, in the capital R case, I think. Like all of that, like, it was fine. The other writings are stuff like The Soul of Man Under Socialism, The Decay of Lying, The Critic as Artist. Like, I found that switch from raw, vulnerable, real Oscar Wilde into these, like, let's talk about the critic as artist and all of this. Like, even like the critic as artist, I do feel like there was some like valid conversations being had on like art and creating and all of that kind of thing, but that switch of tone back into like rakish wit with like a lack of care and individualism trumps all sort of thing. Like, I just found it really, like, I didn't enjoy it as much, because I was just like, oh, but this vision you had for who you could be, where did it go? So I struggle with that. I also don't think he really understands what socialism is. I gave up on The Soul of Man Under Socialism because I was like, I think your argument is flawed, because I think your understanding of what socialism is not correct. What do you mean no one's going to make art? What? So yes, it was interesting, and I did really value De Profundis. The book I listened to was Gender Explorers by Juno Roche. I have forgotten to write down who narrated it, but I'll put that in the description down below. This was literally like, I think it was like 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, like a short audiobook, but it was great. It was interviews with, they're all narrated by the same person, but interviews with young trans people and about their life. And well, part of it is autobiographic, and it's Juno Roche telling you about her life growing up, discovering her identity, all of this sort of thing. And then it goes into these interviews where she's talking to kids of varying ages at various points of their journey, and it was just, I really valued it just as like a first-hand accounts from kids in their own words about their relationship with themselves, what their experience has been like. It made me so happy to tell like so many parents their support, because they also, obviously they're minors, so all of the interviews are being conducted with parents present, so the parents also contribute, and she talks to the parents about like what they have found this journey being like, and what they've done well, and what they wish that they had done differently, and all this sort of thing. And so much, the overwhelming feeling so much of this was this level of support and love that these parents have for their children. It was just so lovely in that way. I also read some short stories in June. This is Amora by Natalie Borges Polesso, which is translated by Sanches. This I know was like a sensation in Brazil when it came out. I really enjoyed this. This is one of those short story collections where there are so many stories in this because they are all very short. They're like little snapshots, and I really enjoyed that. I took my time with it, but you could just race through a handful and then pop it down and come back to it later. I think that one thing she did so well was like her tone, her voice. I just, when I was reading it, I felt like the voice was so distinct. Every single short story, like you're very much dropped in the middle of a moment, but I got the sense of that person really strongly and clearly, and the sense of like what we're exploring in each little drabble. And some of them are so short and some of them are a little bit longer. I think the section that I enjoyed the least is like at the end. There's a section at the end that's called Short and Tart, which are very, very short, like literally like this is just the length of one of them, that. And actually those ones were a bit too short for me. Somewhere there's like a sweet spot where it's like they're short enough that it's like quick little punchy things, but not so short that it's like literally that's a paragraph. But thank you. Someone commented on my video when I hauled this telling me that they'd read it recently and absolutely loved it, and thank you, because it's what made me prioritise it, and I also really enjoyed it. I think it had I think some of those stories are going to stay with me in my little brain, so that was really fab. Penultimately, I want to talk about a big book that I read that's called, like size-wise, that's called Fantasy Art Masters by Dick Jude. I don't have this one to hold up because I've lent it to my dad because it seems like his kind of thing. This one is essentially like snapshots on a few iconic fantasy artists, and the interesting thing about this book, as opposed to some of the other like big arty books I've been reading recently, is that this one is more to do with how they make their art. So it was lots of like interviewing the actual author and like them writing about what their process is, what inspires them, how like the practical things, like how do they make their art, what medium do they use, what do they do. So that was really interesting. I think the downside of it is that I didn't love that many of the artists actually when I like was reading it, so there were a few where I was like not sure how much I'm interested in how you make your art because I don't really like your art. So it was fun. I have like given it to my dad and just said like he can keep it because if he likes it. And then the final book I want to talk about is another non-fiction. This is She Called Me Woman, Nigeria's Queer Women Speak, edited by Azeenarh, Mohammed, Chitra, Nagarajan, and Rafit Aliou. This is a collection of interviews with queer women from Nigeria. It was so fascinating, and also I guess like so lovely and ordinary. It's has an introduction at the beginning where it talks to you about like the process of finding these people. Obviously they've anonymized they've anonymized all the contributors and that kind of thing, because this was put together just after that law was passed. Sorry, that's my washing being done. this was put together like just after that law was passed that was like upping the prison sentence and all that sort of thing. It is just lots and lots and lots of perspectives of these women with various identities, talking about their lives. And I love that thing when you read anthologies that are collecting voices of like normal people, you have that lovely mix of there are common threads that recur, that go throughout, where you can see this commonality of experience that a variety of these people have, but everyone's story is so unique and so individual to them and defined by like geography, like where they're from, religion, family background, like lots and lots of different elements that mean that there is a commonality but also a uniqueness. And when I say that there's like a mundane doesn't feel like the right word, but I'm struggling like an everydayness and ordinariness, I guess, is what I'm after, like to these stories, in that these are normal people, and I loved that glimpse into normal life. And some of it is distressing with what they've had to go through. Some of it is quite pleasing to see how they're like thriving. I just find it so interesting, and there's always that thing to be gained, isn't it, when you just when you move from fiction to non-fiction. So I wanted to read this because I had read stuff like Under the Idolatries and everything for like a fiction perspective, but I was like, but I want to get some non-fiction like thoughts. And this is it like, I think it's like 30 different people talking, so it very much gives you that. That is everything I want to talk about in this part 1 video. I would love, as always, to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. But yes, otherwise tune in next week for part 2.